everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are here to continue our reviews of the Innistrad Midnight Hunt stories. This week with Back to the Main Stories, Episode 3, The Fall of the House of Betzold by K. Arsenal Rivera. So my quick review at the top of this one is, I thought this one was fine. I wasn't, like, jumping out of my seat for it, but I thought it was good. I thought it helped to establish getting the key and etc. So I think it's important to read if you want to understand the overarching story, and I don't think you will have a bad time doing so.
Okay. I'd have to just agree with that.
Okay, fair enough.
And that's kind of it.
They're not all going to be smash out of the park, you know, home runs. And as long as we're not sitting here going, oh my God, it sucked, it's, you know, they were phoning it in. I think that's a great thing. Yeah, but I think that's a great thing because we've absolutely had those where it's like, well, there has to be one, right? And this is that's not the case. So I'm happy with this one being what it is in this instance. So, okay. So if you have not had a chance to read the story yet and our review makes you want to go read the story, we wanted to remove as many barriers as possible, as usual, for all of you. And so the top link in the description down below will take you to this story if it is something you are interested in reading. And then, of course, after you are done, we would love it if you would come back here and join us so that we can have you join in the discussion with us. Give us your opinions, whether you agree, disagree, or somewhere in between with the things that we have to say about this story. And then before we get started into the full review itself, just a reminder, hi, welcome to the channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. We also have other channels as well, linked down in the description box below, Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All, and you should check both of those out and subscribe there as well, and don't forget to ring those bells. Ringing the bell is super important. It means you'll get notifications whenever any of our videos come out on this channel, specifically whenever we go live, which will almost always be every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time right here, Mondays being MTG Arena, and then Fridays being video games in general. This Friday, I am unavailable, so we are not streaming, so I do apologize. That's the day after this video comes out. I believe it's the 8th. But we will be back next week and every other week, every other Friday this month, continuing our spooky month of streams, where we streamed last week Outlast, and we will keep playing that game until its completion.
That was the name of it.
Outlast, yes, that's right. Yes. So, I hope you can be here with us on Fridays for that, and obviously if you're fans of Magic, we're here every Monday playing MTG Arena. So, on to, as I said, the full review itself. I liked that at the beginning of this story, they quickly established how long it had been since the last story.
Okay.
In timeline of the characters that we were seeing, where it said they were getting to Thraben and it had taken them the better part of a week. That's great. It's super important. I mean, I am fully aware we are not those people, but I'm fully aware that there are Vorthos out there, and I appreciate these people, by the way, greatly. There are Vorthos out there who will say, okay, they got there at this period of time, and they left at this period of time, and so that puts them in this year, and this much time has passed since War of the Spark, and like trying to make a timeline as best they can. And so the span of it's been about a week or almost a week, that's super helpful, and I appreciate that both for mental grounding purposes for me, so that I know, like, you know, is it like 5 minutes past when we last saw them, and it's like, well, we took a 5-minute walk through the woods, and now we're here in Thraben. Like, no, it took them over a week. That's a long time.
That's far.
Yeah. So, and it gives Innistrad a sense of scope as well, whether you've been here before or not. It gives you that general idea of how long it takes to traverse, and does that mean that they were traveling as fast as they possibly could, and that's just how long it takes? Not necessarily. I mean, if it's Innistrad, you may have to spend your nights, which are much longer now, hiding and keeping safe. Even though they have Arlen with them, so maybe not, but still, like, it raises a lot of questions, but it also answers a lot of questions, which is always very nice. So just on that, I appreciated that, personally. I had a question. So
It made me think, like, oh, planeswalkers, like, it must suck, right? Because, like, to go from one plane of existence to another is the blink of an eye for them, yet it takes them a week to travel on a plane from one area to the next.
even when they have a time mage with them.
Exactly. So,
yeah.
that probably sucked for them a little bit.
Yeah. My heart
They're so
bleeds.
used to that, like, instant gratification, and then they're like, you know.
Gotta wait a whole week for this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
Especially when they have Chandra with them, I can't imagine.
That she just will not shut up about it.
Well, she's just not patient.
It's true. It's very true. Yeah. I had a question that Arlen makes a reference. She hears about Warren, who was one of the bishops in Thraben. And he's now dead, and we meet his zombie corpse or whatever, and it leads to his son. But when she first hears about him, she reminisces and says, oh, he was the bishop, old and miserly, or whatever it is that she says. But then she says that her knuckles hurt just thinking about him. I get that reference.
You do?
Do you get that?
No.
It's not a story reference. It's not a magic story reference.
Okay.
It's a real world reference.
Okay.
But I was curious if that's a universal thing or an internationally understood thing. If you also were confused, before I tell you, leave it in the comments down below. Say, oh yeah, I didn't think much of it. It seems a little odd. And just because I'm curious, it's purely a thought thing.
Does it mean she, had an urge to punch him?
No. It's because she was taught at that school. Presumably some type of, a parochial school. And so here, in the States at least, back in the day, possibly still today, but I doubt it, but at least back in the day, when you were taught by bishops, priests, nuns, more traditionally, etc., they would hit you on the knuckles with a ruler if you weren't paying attention or you were acting out or whatever. That was a punishment, was corporal punishment of just hitting you with things or throwing things at you. I've heard firsthand accounts from my parents of them having been in school and whether they would get hit or seeing other students or their siblings or whatever. Hearing stories about that as well. So I was surprised when I read that. I was like, oh, is that just a universally understood thing that that goes on? Because maybe I'm wrong.
It wasn't to me because I had never heard of it, but not the hitting of the students thing, but the knuckle thing.
Yeah, it's a ruler on the knuckles is what I was thinking of. Maybe that's not what K. Arsenal Rivera was thinking of specifically, but it screamed that to me when I read it. It was like, oh, okay, yep, the wrapping of the knuckles with the ruler, definitely. So, like I said, let me know in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious if that's an understood thing that just goes on. Then we kind of get more into meeting all the characters and finding out who all is here. Adeline is still with them. They seem to mention, because they don't even really bring it up, but they seem to mention that Adeline's not the only one there that isn't one of the Gatewatch or one of the Planeswalkers. Because they say that I think Arlen references at one point that Adeline's orders are swift and that people are enacting those orders. So who is it? They didn't bring up that there were other people there at all. At least it didn't seem to me that there were. And then when they go into the buildings or when they get to Soren's Manor, for example, Markov Manor, where do these dudes go? Or these other soldiers? Do they just, they're not talked about at all. It's not well, they wait outside or, Adeline leaves her soldiers outside. There's just, their reference that they follow her orders and then they're never spoken of again. Mm-hmm. But I also doubt that a huge contingent of warriors walks into Markov Manor with Adeline and Teferi and Chandra and Arlen and
it's just bodyguards.
Sure, but they're just never talked about again.
Well, yeah, because they already did. When celebrities have bodyguards, Are the bodyguards talked about? No, the celebrity is.
Sure. But you still see them. You know what I mean? Obviously, if there's like photos taken, you would still likely see the big, intimidating looking individual behind the celebrity where you're like, oh, that's why I wouldn't go. Like, not that I would if there wasn't a bodyguard, but like, oh, that's my like compelling reason to not go mess with this person when they're just walking down the street.
Sure.
We hear about Liliana
Okay. Right.
at one point. Did you have more to say on that last point?
No.
Okay. We hear about Liliana at one point, which, reminder that Liliana played a big part in Innistrad the last time we were here and in general. That she, and they even say, all the zombies that are in Thraben, or at least the majority of them, she raised a large contingent of zombies in Eldritch Moon to fight Emrakul, or to stand against Emrakul. And as it would make sense, and I'm actually glad that they talk about this, because it's kind of interesting that, you know, it's not really something that I thought of. Once Emrakul was trapped in the moon and all of the Eldrazi or mutated individuals were dealt with, there were still a shit ton of zombies around. What happens? And I always just kind of assumed that Liliana would be like, you know, and all of them would just fall to the ground and decay, if you will, since we're in this set. Or just be there and then they got to clean them all up. No, they're fully animated, still walking around. They just took over Thraben fully. Okay, and like...
Because Liliana doesn't give a damn.
And they reference that in this story, that like somebody asked her, you know, well, what do we do about these? And she had some snarky BS response that like wasn't a response at all.
She just fucked up.
Yeah, and now all these zombies are just left here. So now they have to go through, and Adeline and her soldiers or compatriots, along with Chandra, are fighting and taking them down. Chandra, of course, burning them, whereas Adeline using more traditional swords and weaponry. Teferi even helps a little bit, right? Adeline and Chandra stay back to deal with the zombies. And Teferi like slows a couple of them, or slows a group of them down.
Yeah.
So that Adeline and her crew have an easier time dealing with them, which was cool.
Yeah.
Oh, and then we hear again about Tovalor. Right? We heard about Tovalor last time. That was the big part of the last story. And just a reference again to him, reminding you that he exists and reminding you of Arlen's relationship with him, Arlen's feelings towards him, what have you.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it sure is. Where she says, where she says that he would tell her to give in to your passions and your instincts, were the words that they used. Like, her impulse was to do something, and then she was like, oh, but maybe I should have restraint. And then she thought of Tovalor, and she's like, oh, well, Tovalor would tell me that my instincts are automatically correct, right? He leans more towards the wild, and the wilds in general, in saying, no, if you are being told by your instincts that you should do something, you should listen to your instincts. They know better.
Sometimes that's true.
I agree.
But humans have higher level brain function for a reason.
Right.
So that we can make those snap judgments in the immediate for safety purposes.
Right.
And then take a little extra time with it and make a real choice about what needs to be done from there.
It's true. And I thought it was interesting, though, that, like, kind of in the same breath, not exactly, but in the same paragraph before that thought ends, Arlen mentions the fact that the church, specifically, is what she references in her head for the entity that toys with what Tovalar preaches by saying that the church more values restraint in that regard. Which is definitely true, to you know, that the church tries to preach morality and what is right and what is wrong and what you should and shouldn't do, trying to kind of teach you in that way or guide you in that way. for better or for worse. Many people have many different opinions on that, and that's perfectly fine. I think, you know, anybody's feelings on that are valid, but...
well, I think what's weird is to look at those as being opposites. They're not, right? I think they're just, you know, parts that make up the sum whole.
Okay.
Of what it means to be human, right? And so I think they're just trying to point out a lot of ways in which humans can kind of be differentiated from animals or monsters,
sure.
or, you know, werewolves or vampires or whatever, ghosts.
Yeah.
You know, the types of things that you encounter in Innistrad. You know, I think they're trying to, like, point out those sort of black and white aspects and then kind of blur them and show you that they're gray with more story.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and it's just, that was definitely something that jumped out at me, because it's just so interesting, the dichotomy of Tovalor's teachings versus just the church. We hear more, again, about Abyssinian symbols in this story. We hear about them being repaired, like attempting to be repaired, even though, again, as we know, the subject of those symbols is not there anymore, and everyone knows it.
Right.
They still are putting forth the effort to fix them, to, especially the warped ones, like, make them better for either for themselves, for each other, whatever the case may be. And then we even have a moment where, going towards Soren's house, Arlen sees an Abyssinian symbol that's overgrown with vines, and she cuts them away and takes a moment to pray. And that while she's praying, Adeline joins her. And then Teferi. And then Chandra. And then Kaya. Like, it's like they all understand the need for this and join in with it.
Yeah, and if it's not a need, it's a respect and it's a respect and an acceptance.
Sure, yes.
For religions not their own.
Yeah, I mean, even Kaya kind of comes in and does it with a sigh towards the end. Like, you can tell she's like, all right, whatever. I think this is BS, but I'm here anyway. I'm trying. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So it's less about, I think, them thinking that doing it is important, and more about them thinking that supporting Arlen in that moment,
validating her as well. Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. And it's funny you brought up respect, right? That was a sign of respect. Speaking of respect, we then start talking about Soren, because now we've found out from Dennick that Soren took or was given the Moonsilver Key, and that is likely who has it. And so now the group goes to Markov Manor. And on their way to Markov Manor, you know...
When we found that out, I was like, oh, of course. God damn it.
Amy loves Soren. But...
Of course he, like, conned someone into giving him this thing. Like, I'm more important than you, I promise. Because you know that's what he said.
Probably.
Not that way, of course. But
nope.
He, in some capacity, convinced them of that for some stupid reason.
You mean they believed him for some stupid reason?
Right.
Yeah. But while thinking about him, before they actually even get there, Arlen kind of mulling it over in her head is like, you know, I get it, not a lot of people like him. I'm curious with the way that Teferi stepped up and spoke to him first. And Arlen even says, of course he's the one who does it. We talked about this way in week 1 or no, I guess it was week 2, because it was the side story, the first side story with Teferi. They're both old walkers. They were around pre-mending, and they're the only planeswalkers in that group, unless I'm forgetting something vital, but they're the only walkers in that whole group of planeswalkers that have been around since before the mending.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that's something that old walkers can sense. Other old walkers.
Right, because I don't think, at least to my knowledge, I don't think they ever crossed paths prior to this, unless someone, like, pointed out Sorin to Teferi during War of the Spark, because technically they were both on Ravnica for that, but Sorin was fighting Nahiri the whole time, and then went away, so, like, I don't either.
So, like, not part of anything.
I agree. So, who knows, but I thought that was interesting, that little interaction. But then also, Arlen, thinking about him, she makes a comment that, you know, none of these other planeswalkers, none of these people in general, understand what it feels like to hunger. But not just to hunger, because of course everybody knows what hunger feels like, but to hunger, but to have to ignore that basic animal instinct. So there we go again about ignoring your instincts. To have to ignore that basic animal instinct on such a regular basis to be considered like not a savage, basically.
Yeah.
And that while she acknowledges that she doesn't like Sorin, she states that she can respect. She states that she can respect him because of what he has to go through as a being that hungers for something that arguably is unnatural to the humans, or in the humans' minds, to hunger for.
I can't.
You were just full of it tonight, huh? All right, that's fine. That's fine.
You're full of it.
Yeah, I am definitely full of it. That is not something I will ever argue. There is an explanation for how Sorin got out of the wall. Sort of. There's
a divot.
there's rubble, and there's a hole, and there's like bloody tooth marks and stuff. Because if you remember, was it Kaya or Teferi was like, well, whoever this is, they don't have teeth anymore. So now my question is, was
check if he had teeth?
Yes, I think they would have mentioned it. It also might not have been him. I mean, he has
somebody trying to save him.
Multiple people trying to save him, right? He has contingents of vampires, the Markov family line, etc. Unless they're all dead. Maybe they're all dead and I'm not remembering. But regardless, there would be vampires that would have interest in letting him out. Or it could have been implying that it was him. Either way, he is out of the wall now.
Don't eat rocks, guys. It's not good for your teeth.
No. Unless you're Gorons.
Yeah.
Go check out our Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time playthrough on Video Games for All. The finale is this Wednesday, so stay tuned. Then I was a little upset, a little bit, and I will admit, or I will say that I'll be proven wrong. I'm looking forward to be proven wrong. In the next couple of stories, if it does actually get resolved. But how many times do we have to be on Innistrad? I'm sure it will get resolved, at least in Crimson Vow, if not here. But the fact that this story ends with Sigarda and Sorin fighting, and we don't get to know what happens to them. Because the group is now leaving. So if we keep following that group, we're not going to find out what happens with Sigarda and Sorin. How many times are we going to do that? How many times are we going to just be like, uh-oh, what's going to happen to Sorin? And then we leave.
I mean, I don't care. I don't want to know what happens to Sorin. I want to know what happens to Sigarda.
Sure. But regardless, I think that's the same. I would argue that's the same thing.
Exactly. I mean, in this situation, it is.
Correct. Yes, exactly. So that was a little frustrating to me. It's like, okay, I assume in Crimson Vow, which will be coming out soon enough, that
Probably
Soren will likely have something to say about what seems to be the wedding of Olivia Voldaren and Edgar Markov, which he might, like I said, he might have something to say about that. So hopefully he'll show up if that's something that he's allowed to do, and it won't just be like, well, Crimson Vow came and went, and last we knew Soren was fighting Sigarda. That sucks. So I'm sure we'll get the resolution, but it was still the kind of thing of like, God damn it, again, we have to be like, I wonder what's going to happen every time. So that's frustrating. That was frustrating to me. And then the last thing is
I was just frustrated by what an asshole he is.
All the time. Well, that's just always.
Just take a minute to explain yourself. And then maybe, just maybe, people will hate you less.
I did, but didn't understand what he was getting at, though, when he kind of, like, when Teferi was like, listen, Arlen is trying to save the plane. She's trying to save the world here. Give us the key. You know, we want to make the day-night balance better again, or whatever.
But he's too busy sulking and trying to act like his dick is big, so he doesn't want to give it up.
And, well, his response was, what have you ever done for this place? In other words, who are you, Arlen Cord, to say that you know what this plane needs better than I do? If I, Soren Markov, thought that the Moonsilver Key was needed to restore balance, I, Soren Markov, would have used the Moonsilver Key to fix the Celestis and bring about balance again to day and night.
And the point is, who the hell are you, Soren? Fuck off.
Well,
if you're gonna sit there and think you're better than everybody else, no reason for it. And none at all.
And that was Sigarda's point when she finally shows up, is that, like, first of all, I love that she was like, Arlen, your faith brought me here. Because
that's fucking awesome.
If there are, I mean, for people of faith, hearing on such a consistent basis or experiencing on such a consistent basis, your faith being challenged or stricken down, and then nothing positive happening for you, that's...
Or the demoralization of, you know, just being...
Go ahead, I was just going
to... No.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's very demoralizing, but yes, thank you. So yes, exactly.
Just no, because I said so.
Yeah, exactly. Amy got there first. It's fine, totally fine. But yeah, it's like, that is... very ratifying.
That was being Soren, not me.
That's right. You don't know, I know.
Exactly. It's like, no, you're not better than anybody else just because you're old and you've been here for forever. No one gives a damn, old timer.
Wow. And so then there was one other point that we wanted to bring up, like the last line of the story was one that you enjoyed. I can read it if you'd like, but otherwise I left it for you.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the quote from the end of the story just says, nothing is guaranteed in Innistrad, but they will try to survive, try to endure, and look once more to the holy light of day.
Yeah, it's awesome. I loved that line, because I try to look at the general through line of trauma for all of these stories, and I didn't really see it for this one.
Yeah, I mean, again, she like lightly references Tovalar, but that's not...
Right.
You know, that was just a lesson that he taught versus what she was then tried to learn at the church or whatever.
Right. I mean, and then you have like Soren being like, you know, basically deciding that like the betterment of the plane is less important than his own, like, I don't know, authority over the people who show up at his house. Like, it's kind of silly. That line I felt like was a nice one to kind of harken back to that. Just by saying like, living on Innistrad for the majority of people is fighting for your life day in and day out. It's baseline survival, listening to those instincts because you need to survive. in order to wake up the next light of day, you have to fight to get there.
Yeah.
And that is sort of the purpose of the people who live there, right? To like, that's sort of like their meaning in life, is to just keep going. And it's so like stripped down, and so it's just like a trauma experience when you don't get to have the rest of who you are, because all you get to be is somebody who fights for your life, or fights for just like the baseline of things that you need for existence. And so it kind of like, it's kind of like that little nod to the whole thing with the instinct and the restraint, like, oh, you're hungry, well, you don't get to be hungry, you know, because you just have to like keep going. And yeah, I thought it was really cool how it's got this like this sort of like optimism to it. I'm currently reading a book by I believe he's a psychoanalyst, Viktor Frankl, who was a German man who spent some time in Auschwitz. And he wrote a book, or he wrote many books, because he was a psychoanalyst or a psychologist or something, psychiatrist. But I'm reading the book Man's Search for Meaning, which was probably his most famous book, because in the beginning he talks about his experience in Auschwitz, and then at the end he talks about his experience or his theories based on what he learns from himself and the other prisoners in Auschwitz about the human condition and about existentialism, essentially. And I just thought that that line was perfect, sort of in line with that, because I'm only very towards the beginning of the story, but you know, he really tries to talk about, like, less about like the terrible horrors that you experience as a prisoner in a concentration camp, and focuses more on the people and like what it means to the people to experience like everyday life, right? And so I think it kind of it just reminded me a lot of that book and like where I'm at in that book. Just that line of, nothing is guaranteed in Innistrad, but they will try to survive, try to endure, and look once more to the holy light of day. It's that sort of like trying to figure out the sort of line between like the senseless violence that you're experiencing and that there's enough meaning to your life that you don't just want to kill yourself, you want to survive, right? So like the holy light of day kind of representing that sort of the sort of concept of there's enough meaning to my life even in this meaningless horror that I'm experiencing. There's enough meaning in my life to continue living.
And it's like the other theme that was briefly touched on here and has kind of been all throughout of just faith. Having faith, keeping faith. Again, Arlen kind of has hers ratified here nicely, thankfully, by Sigarda herself. But kind of keeping it in general. I mean, even just the idea of keeping up the symbols, the Abyssinian symbols. The patron, you know she's gone. You know she is.
Right.
And yet, keeping the faith, praying, getting the respect from your friends of having them join you, not necessarily in an attempt to strengthen your prayer, but to let you know what, your faith is valid. Keep it going.
Right.
That kind of thing.
And like you said, the ratification of that is validating for her, but it's probably also somewhat validating for them in a way that they weren't expecting, right? Because they were doing it for her more than they were doing it for anything else, right? And so the fact that Sigarda shows up in their time of need is probably something that affected them each quite a bit as well on their own faith journey, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. All right.
And it would be kind of cool to get to hear from that a bit.
Okay.
From all of them, but I know we probably won't. But
well, we still have 2 more main stories and I believe 3 more side stories. What was this one? This one was side story number 2. So yeah, 3 more side stories. So next week will be side story number 3, and then we have 4 more weeks after that. If we run into Crimson Vow, we're just going to keep going week by week. I'm not we can't. I don't want to rush these things, and so. Plus, once Crimson Vow is out, presumably then we'll have a block of time, span of time, I should say, where we won't have stuff. So, we'll be able to, we'll have lots of content for many weeks. Yes. Hopefully. And again, as I mentioned at the top, because I think that's going to then be the end of this episode. Yeah. So, but as I mentioned at the top, please don't forget to...
I've milked it to every drop that I can.
I think you're just fine. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. Thank you so much for joining us. We obviously have, like I said, those other channels as well. We've got more stuff coming out on Video Games for All. And then keep your eyes peeled on Gluten Free for All. I keep saying that to people. You really should. Yes. I'm telling you.
Yes.
We've got some interesting...
I've got things planned.
I say we, again, that's... Amy has some interesting things coming up, and I'm looking forward to seeing them, and I hope you all are as well. And hey, don't forget, everybody, leave your thoughts down in the comments below. If you want to get into a faith discussion based on these stories, if you want to get into a trauma discussion based on these stories, or if you want to get into a Planeswalker discussion and a Soren Markov discussion, an Old Walker discussion based on these stories, whatever it happens to be, you joining us is a great way of doing that so that we can all show off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this week. Please let us know, as always, your thoughts down in the comments below. We would love, love, love to hear from you and keep that conversation going. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I've been Joe.
And I'm Mimi.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.